evening. Thank you for tuning in to Face to Face. I'm your host, Dennis Ward. Our guest this week is Irene Young. Irene is from Opaskwayak Cree Nation in northern Manitoba. She's a mother, a grandmother, a residential school survivor, an elder for the University of Brandon, and helps train community justice workers. Irene, thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening.
So, Irene, I'd like to start with some work that you did with the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry that was created in 1988 in response to the trial for two men for the murder of Helen Betty Osborne and the death of J.J. Harper, who was shot by a Winnipeg police officer. Irene, can you tell us a little bit about the work that you did for the AGI?
I was hired as a private investigator within the northern region. Such things as looking into and speaking with the individuals that were, let's say, that were associated, not associated, but with the, regarding the inquiry. Because with that, a book was given to me to read from this Conspiracy of Silence. And certainly living in that community where it occurred, I did a lot of interviews with First Nations people, but also experiencing that there was a lot of racism and discrimination, and to date it still exists.
What were some of the things that you discovered during your investigation?
The worst is, again, trying to get both sides of stories. The First Nations people were very open. But again, when you went to the other side of the, because our reserve, our river divides the reserve and the town itself. So the town side was not very cooperative, let me put it that way. So there was a lot of, call it issues that they didn't want to discuss, especially racism.
And the purpose of the AGI was to examine the relationship between Indigenous peoples and the justice system. How would you describe that relationship almost 30 years ago?
Okay. I see a lot of, how would you say, because of the recommendations by there was a lot of positive things that came out of the inquiry itself. That's, from my opinion, because of that, there was with the NKO, which is Northern Manitoba Chiefs, during a General Assembly, there was a referendum for, again, looking into our own justice issues as First Nations people, and this is where the program originated from, because of the inquiry, is the First Nations Justice Strategy. Now from there, there's a lot of what I see positive is we're helping our community, especially the youth, being involved with the law first time, that they don't have a criminal record. It not only deals with the youth, but also with the adults. And they have made so many success stories. They have made lifetime changes, which is what the positive outcome of this inquiry was. So from there, there's the restorative justice process involves the offender with the victim, and again with the restorative justice committee representing the community in negotiations with dialogue aimed at restitution, reconciliation, and restoring harmony back into the community. And very, very effective when we use and utilize our elders and incorporate the culturally appropriate programs that are, again, just part of my job is to deliver the culturally appropriate programs. And it is well embraced by a lot of communities, especially when it relates to their own, the uniqueness of it, within each community. Like it's very rewarding for our people, again, to for personal development to move forward whatever.
Irene, as somebody who was part of the, an investigator with the AGI and now works with community justice workers, have you seen an improvement over that 30-year period of the relationship between the justice system and Indigenous peoples?
Definitely. There's so many changes that is, again, that benefits not just First Nations, but all people that are within the program, that are, I say, referred from the courts, because our program is a diversion program. So in this way, it's not only limited to First Nations. And again, because of the programming itself, it's geared towards utilizing our teachings. It's very, very important, and again, it creates a lot of positive into our. And the one thing is also, it's not only our youth, but also as adults. We talk about the crisis of identity. And there's a lot of awareness of who they are, where they come from, that type of thing. And with that history, with colonization and assimilation process, of course, is part of the awareness of who we are, where our roots are, that type of thing.
One of the things, at the time of the AGI, the incarceration rate for Indigenous peoples was at about 50%, and today it's 75% or higher. What do you think is behind that increasing so much?
Okay, again, to my opinion, is because there was a lack of, we were just talking about identity, and losing or retaining our culture, our values, and the teachings are very, very important. Understanding them, creating that they're the spiritual part of who we are. And again, it goes back to our wisdom keepers, the elders. A lot of times, from my perspective and from my experience, is that the elders were, because of part of the colonization, that they were afraid to speak up. Now we're starting to be more vocal in a sense where it's very, how would you say, positive than a negative. Of course, from there we have a lot of issues that can arise. However, when we look at our going back to the teachings, they're very simple, but very, very hard to follow in a sense. For instance, with number one is humble. A lot of people, I would say, are lacking that teaching. They don't really fully understand what being humble means. Instead, it goes into more ego-driven, where people have to understand the difference between serving our people against, and the difference between self-serving, where it's career-driven. See, we forget that little one important component as who we are as First Nations people. But of course, the other one is the kindness that we talk about. The sweetgrass represents kindness, but we also have to utilize that kindness. It is very, very important that we be kind to ourselves, not egotistical. See, there's a difference between, like I say, serving people and with self-serving. It can go however that one perceives. But if you understand the teachings, are very simple, and having someone to teach you and to guide you is where I think, and that's why our programs are very effective, where our people embrace these programs.
And Irene, we're going to talk about those teachings and those programs after the break. We've got to just take a quick step aside here, and then we'll continue our conversation with Irene Young on Face to Face. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Irene Young, who's a mother, grandmother, a residential school survivor, an elder for the University of Brandon, and works with helping to train community justice workers. Before the break, Irene, we were talking about that, and maybe if you can just speak about community justice and what that actually means.
Community justice is very much needed because we, as First Nations people, we know one another, and we know the families. The history is very, very important. That is why part of it, the culturally appropriate programming, we need to know where our roots are, where we come from, that type of thing, the history of our families. And understanding that and knowing that, but also awakening the spirit is very, very important. Now, community-based programs, which are culturally appropriate, are more effective because, again, it's coming from the community, it's community involvement and that type of thing. Like they say, it takes a child. It takes a community to raise a child, right? But it also takes the child to fit into the community. So it has to go both ways. We seem to think that the child is the one that she should be teaching. However, we can learn from the child. So again, we're talking about that balance, restoring that balance within a community, and hearing, and to have you're empowering the youth by listening. They should have a voice. But at the same time, we need the voice of the elder, not just being a token or being recognized as an elder without being proactive, geared towards the betterment of their community. That's very much needed. If we did that, meaning I'm not excluded from that because I have to be responsible and accountable for my community, and I need to voice, to express this is appropriate or not, or inappropriate, and let a child see and understand the difference between behaviors of what is and what isn't. Not to be afraid. Basically, when we're afraid or ashamed, we cannot move forward. Like you said, I'm a residential school product, and in order for me to, again, know who I was, I had to move forward. I was a victim, and I was in a victim mode for so long that but I knew I had to change, to make a change in my life. So I had to become a survivor. But you can't be in that survivor mode for a long time because your behaviors are that. So you need to move forward. And this is where the process is coming to play, where after you become move forward from victim again into another one, you step into another one, which is we have to live. And how do we live? What am I bringing into the community? See, I have that responsibility also, not only to my children, my great-grandchildren, I'm also a great-grandmother. And there's a lot of people that, I shouldn't say a lot, but I would say a number of people that have actually adopted me as their mother, grandmother, great-grandmother. Again, we need to go back to that relationship, because when we relate to one another as relatives, we have respect. And I think that's the foundation of these programs, respecting our history. Then, hey, let's say I'm a Cree woman from Opaskwayak, and I'm a great-grandmother. So we have a little history here that we have to carry in respect and in honor like our forefathers. Maybe somebody will see that and carry on the same message. So we need to work together as a community. And again, the drive would be for the betterment of our community as a whole, not as a family unit or as myself, but the whole community involvement. And this is where the justice issues come into play. For instance, I remember when I was young, if I did something wrong, I got reprimanded by a community member that seen what I was doing was inappropriate. And that's where I was disciplined. Now, if I ran home and told my parents, I would get a licking. Because, number one, you don't go and squeal on somebody that. And number two was you should have done that. Now, today, if you say something to a child, even if they're playing with fire, say, you're going to get, maybe you get hurt, burnt. Mm-hmm. The family or the mother or the father or somebody will come and say, hey, leave my child alone. So there's a lot of differences in that way, but also in the justice issues where, okay, understanding, applying assault charge, using our traditional ways to say, hey, that's lack of respect for yourself, but also for other people's property or against another person. So in that way, it's very, they understand more in that way, and they get to know their history, and they get to know their culture, the language itself. We try and incorporate the language into these programs, which a lot of times it's who we are. And that's the thing about the lost of a lot of things, especially specifically that.
Irene, I wanted to get your thoughts as somebody who has worked with the AGI, a big inquiry. Your thoughts on where things are at today with the National Inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
Okay, this is from my opinion and from my, is that it is a national, provincial, of course, federal, provincial, territorial justice issues. However, like with the uniqueness of each community, certainly it's very inspiring to say it's come to the national level. However, in my opinion, I think it needs to be more community-based, simply because, again, like I said before, with the community involvement, you're looking at a bigger scale when you say national, and each province have different jurisdictions and that type of thing. But when we start looking at our own and incorporating our values, especially the teachings, it would be a lot simpler. Your own home fire, the sacredness of it. Because each, like, imagine a teepee with the fire in front of it or inside. That gives you warmth, it gives you protection. But it also involves those teepees, your histories, your families, how many families. And if one is missing, the other poles have to be more strong, or they have to come. They have to be put a little closer. So again, there's something wrong with it's still up, mind you, but you know there's something not where it should be at, and that's the same thing with these with this inquiry, this national inquiry. I could see if it was more community-based. You have a lot of workers that should be assigned to, again, to do their work. We have talked about ego, humbleness. Maybe some egos need to be deflated. That is my opinion. So that's other than that, I see it as something, like I said, it should have happened if only the recommendations of AGI were followed through. So this is where we're at today. Now going back to the AGI, maybe we need to review and look at each community, look at or each tribal council or each province, First Nations people, look at what were the recommendations. Maybe we need to go back to the basics. That I am not an expert at, nor will I ever be, but my opinion.
Irene, we appreciate your opinion and appreciate you joining us here this week on Face to Face. We will be right back after another quick break to wrap up.